We all know last Sunday we celebrated Epiphany, right? We talked about Epiphany as the day that Christ was revealed to the Gentiles. It was the day that we celebrated the Magi following the star, coming to see the baby Jesus. And the reason we talk about it as the day that Christ was revealed to the Gentiles is that Gentiles are like you, me, and the Magi, non-Jews. We also talked about how Epiphany, in the sense of the church, is not just something you suddenly know, but it is a manifestation of the divine. And we talked about how over the years past, all kinds of ways have been done to celebrate Epiphany. From reading the Nativity story to reading the story of the Magi, even talking about the baptism of Jesus and the wedding feast at Cana, which is today's text. You know, in some churches and in some traditions, Epiphany is more than a one-day thing. It is a season. In some traditions, right now, we would be in the midst of an epiphanic season. I think I said that right. An epiphanic season. And in the midst of that season, this scripture from the Gospel of John makes perfect sense. We've been talking about things that happen in John that we should pay attention to, right? Because we're going to be in the Gospel of John for a while, so we're supposed to look for certain themes that develop as we go through the Gospel. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the role of questions. Do y'all remember that? You can just nod and act like you remember to make me happy. Sure. We talked about how important questions are in the Gospel of John. Questions come up, it means we need to pay attention. Sometimes the questions get answered, sometimes they don't get answered, sometimes they just don't get answered the way we want them to be answered. But all of the questions let us know. They're like markers. They're like little signs that say, pay attention, there's something important going on here. Well, today, in the Gospel of John, we have a sign. The first of the 7 signs that Jesus performs throughout the Gospel of John. Those signs, those are markers as well. So when I was in seminary, I was lucky enough to have a professor by the name of Charlie Kauser. By the time I got to seminary, Charlie was in his 70s. He had already been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and he was still teaching every day. Charlie was this, it's hard to explain, first of all, he was a brilliant man. I've got books that he's written that are on my shelf. And he was also a very laid-back person. For as smart as he was, you would have never guessed it. Because he was just kind of this old boy from South Carolina. With a nice southern drawl, never got in any hurry. Everything was always just as it was. Well, one semester, I took a class from him on the Gospel of John. And he started talking about these times when in the Gospel of John, we need to pay attention. And when we would get to those points in the text, this nice, gentle, laid-back, languid South Carolinian would go, ding, 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 pay attention! So, there's a sign, ding, 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 pay attention. This sign, this wedding at Cana, is something to pay attention to. And it fits very nicely to that idea of epiphany, manifestations of the divine. But one of the most fascinating things about this passage to me is that on top of the manifestation of the divine, we also get a glimpse into the normal life of Jesus. We get to have a little look at what it must have looked like for Jesus to have an ordinary day. And think about it. Normally, in the Gospels, when we encounter Jesus, he's preaching and teaching, or he's doing something like healing the sick, or making disciples, or having a confrontation with the powers that be. That's not happening here. He's at a wedding. Has anyone here never been to a wedding? Raise your hand if you have never been to a wedding. Right. We've all been to weddings. They're a very common experience. And weddings back then, just like weddings today, are a big celebration. They are a celebration of family and friends who come together to celebrate the bride and the groom who are getting married and committing their lives to one another. Weddings have always been like that. Always been a celebration. Always been a gathering of good friends for a good time. And that is what's happening here with Jesus. Jesus and his disciples and his mother have the opportunity to go and be at a wedding, just like all the rest of us. You know, he wasn't officiating the wedding. He wasn't the guest of honor. He wasn't giving a toast. He was just there. And it's good for us to get to see Jesus as an ordinary person from time to time. You know, in the Gospels, we essentially get what happens to Jesus when he's born and when he's in his ministry. We don't know much about those in-between years when he supposedly had those more normal experiences. And we've been fascinated by it as a people. So much so that if you took a little time, you would find out that people have written, they have sung, they have made movies, they have done all kinds of things about what we think might have happened in those in-between years. John Prine, who is, as you should know, one of the greatest singer-songwriters of all time, wrote a song once called Jesus, The Missing Years. It was the title of his album. A guy named Christopher Moore wrote a very popular book called Lamb, the Gospel of Jesus, the Gospel of Christ according to his childhood friend Biff, talking about what happens in those in-between years. And in the 90s, a director by the name of Kevin Smith wrote a movie called Dogma. And in this movie, Alan Rickman plays a character who is an angel, the Metatron, the voice of God. Had to be the voice of God because God's voice was too powerful for human ears. In the Metatron, Alan Rickman tells a story about what it was like when a 12-year-old boy found out that he was the Son of God. He said, can you imagine what that was like? I was the one who had to tell him. When all he wanted to do was just play with other children his age, I had to be the one to tell him that he was the Son of God, and that he would endure a lifetime of persecution and crucifixion at the hands of the very people he had come to enlighten and redeem. Beg you to take it all away. Now remember, this is just a movie. It's not a gospel. But what it does is it shows how fascinated we can be with the truly human aspects of Jesus. You know, one of the paradoxes of our faith is that we believe that Jesus is both fully human and fully divine. Well, here at the wedding at Cana, we get to see a peek at that fully human part of Jesus. But when we look at the ordinary Jesus, we find out that with Jesus, even the ordinary becomes extraordinary. So he's at this wedding, trying to be ordinary, and there's a problem. The host has run out of wine. His mother finds out about it and tells him to do something about it. Now, there's going to be a message in here someday when my children and your children and all those misbehave and say, if your mama tells you to do something, you need to do it because it's going to happen anyway. But that's not the sermon for today. Jesus, in this moment, realizes from his mother that there's a problem. Now, we probably wouldn't see this as a major problem. I mean, no one is dying, right? No one is being abused. No one is sick that needs healing. And yet it is an important enough problem that Mary thinks Jesus should do something about it. So even though it may not seem like a very significant problem, I can tell you, having experienced several weddings and been through several snafus at weddings, if something like this were to happen, it's a problem. You know, if you run out of wine before the party's over, suddenly the party's over. If you run out of wine and people want to stay for a while, they can't. Suddenly you have failed as a host. Suddenly you as a host, you are embarrassed, and the bride and groom are at the very least stressed out by what is happening. When Lauren and I got married, we got married in summer, early part of summer, in southern Mississippi, so it was hot. Thankfully, we had a reception in a building that was directly across the street from the wedding at the church we had it at. And this building was an older building. It had once upon a time been the library in downtown Hattiesburg, but now it was being used as like an event space. Well, here's the thing about older buildings, for those of you who know something about older buildings. The HVAC system in those places is generally spotty at best. And let's just say that on this nice, warm summer Mississippi evening, the air conditioning was not working at its optimum level. I mean, people were sweating. They were coming out of their jackets, their ties, their shoes, right and left. But, you know, we're all from the South. We can handle the heat, handle a little sweat. I'm sure it'll be fine. And it would have been fine. Except, we find out from the reception that some people are having a hard time getting their food. They're having a hard time getting their drinks from the bar. The lines are going out the door. We don't know what's going on. We find out later that the caterer and the caterer's head chef had a fight. So the head chef got drunk, quit, and locked up all the rest of the food and went away. So the rest of the staff was scrambling around, trying to do what they could to make amends, and still people are getting all jammed up. Let me tell you, that can cause some anxiety. There might have been more severe problems in the world, but at that moment, I didn't think there were. But don't worry, everything worked out. Just like everything worked out at the wedding at Cana. For us, it was a little bit different. We were lucky enough to have had two ministers officiate our wedding, and so one of them, when he saw the problem, immediately jumped behind the bar, I guess as Presbyterian ministers are wont to do, and the husband of the other minister joined him behind the bar, and they started serving people, and before we knew it, everybody was getting all that they wanted, and all was good. At Cana, when Jesus tells his mother he doesn't want to do what she wants him to do, and then he has to do it anyway, he turns water into wine. Not just wine, but the best wine. He is there at this wedding, trying to be just another ordinary guy. But we find out that with Jesus, even the ordinary is extraordinary. I read somewhere that the purpose of this passage is to convince those who experience it that Jesus is the Christ. Now my guess is that most of us here are already convinced of that. Most of us here probably already believe that Jesus is the Christ. John was telling the story to tell people, look, if this guy can turn water into wine, obviously he is the anointed Son of God. Well, if you're not already convinced, I hope this story convinces you that Jesus is the Christ. But if you are already convinced, what's the point? What's the point of us reading and experiencing this passage? Perhaps the point of the passage is to inspire us to be able to convince others that Jesus is the Christ. When people come to us and they're wondering, how can you see or believe or have faith in this person as Jesus the Christ, we can explain to them that the beauty of Jesus is that even in the ordinary with Jesus, things are extraordinary. We can find extraordinary things in the ordinary. Frederick Buechner, who some of you may be familiar with, wrote a book called The Sacred Journey. And The Sacred Journey is his telling of his life. He describes his life and how he has seen God speak to him in his life. And he does this hoping to help the rest of us see how God speaks in our lives. In the introduction, he says, "It is into our personal lives that God speaks. Someone we love dies, say. Some unforeseen act of kindness or cruelty touches the heart or makes the blood run cold. We fail a friend, or a friend fails us, and we are appalled at the capacity we all have for estranging the very people in our lives we need the most. Or maybe nothing nothing extraordinary happens at all. Just one day following another, helter-skelter in the manner of days. We sleep and dream, we wake, we work, we remember and forget, we have fun and are depressed, and into the thick of it, or out of the thick of it, at moments of even the most humdrum of our days, God speaks. The truth is that Jesus does make the ordinary extraordinary. And I hope that this passage inspires you to share that with those who need to hear it.